So the thing is, the original short stories and novels by Ian Fleming aren't really very funny at all. There are very few elements of comedy aside from the names of the various Bond girls. And this leads to the following question. Why did they choose to put so much comedy in the films? I think partly it's to do with wanting to lighten the mood and get away from the darker tone of the Fleming material and make these stories more light-hearted and family-friendly so that they could appeal to a broader cinema audience. But the comedy in the James Bond films isn't really there from the start, so it sort of develops over time, especially across the first 3 films. So the first film back in 1962, Dr. No, hardly had any comedy at all. But it did include this scene between Bond and Moneypenny that had quite a few comedic elements.
You never take me to dinner looking like this, James. You never take me to dinner, period.
I would, you know. Only Anne would have me court-martialed for illegal use of government property.
Dr. No also includes a topical joke that at the time was probably quite funny. But now hardly anyone is going to get this joke unless they look it up on the internet. Now this painting had been stolen in 1961, which of course was only 1 year before Dr. No came out, which is something that most of the audience would have understood at the time because it was in the newspapers. But overall, Dr. No is a pretty serious film. But the fact that this film was more serious didn't really hurt it very much. It was still a fun and exciting spy film. But then in the second film, From Russia with Love, they did introduce a few more elements of comedy. The scene that really stands out in this regard is the conversation between Bond and Tanya about the cipher device. And this is a very good example of character-based comedy. And the scene is much funnier because by this stage we understand the character dynamics between Bond, M and Moneypenny.
Dushka, tell me the truth. Am I as exciting as all those Western girls?
Oh, once when I was with Anne in Tokyo, we had an interesting experience.
Thank you, Miss Moneypenny. That's all.
But despite the fact that From Russia with Love included this type of scene, the earlier scene in the film between Bond and Q is completely devoid of comedy.
An ordinary black leather case with 20 rounds of ammunition here and here. Now, if you take the top off, you'll find the ammunition inside.
So Connery and Llewellyn play this scene completely straight. There's no elements of comedy at all. And this is a big difference between From Russia with Love and Goldfinger. So the man that was responsible for introducing more comedy into the franchise is the director of the third film, and that's Guy Hamilton.
It seemed to me that if we could do the pre-credit sequence, which is a wonderful piece of nonsense, I mean, where you can go swimming with a seagull on top of your head and you can unzip your suit and have a white tuxedo underneath. If that makes you laugh, let's all now, after the credit titles, go for a great big ride and have fun.
So Goldfinger includes a lot more comedy. First of all, you got the same sort of relationship between Bond and Moneypenny that you saw in the first film.
That's the flimsiest excuse you've ever given me. Oh, well, some girls have all the luck. Who is she, James?
She is me, Miss Moneypenny. And kindly omit the customary byplay with 007.
But Guy Hamilton also introduced a comical dynamic between Bond and Q, which is something that was completely absent in the previous film.
At the rehearsals, I was working at a desk and Bond comes in and I got up to greet him. And Guy said, no, you don't take any notice of this man, you don't like him. And I thought, well, but this is Bond, this is James Bond, and I'm just an ordinary civil servant. I must admire him like everybody else does. He says, no, of course you don't. He doesn't treat your gadgets with any respect at all.
Audio-visual, range 150 miles.
Ingenious and useful too. Allow a man to stop off for a quick one en route.
But this film also includes witty one-liners,
Shocking.
comically absurd elements like old ladies with machine guns, Sexual innuendo?
Washington. At the White House this afternoon, the president said he was entirely satisfied.
That makes two of us.
You've also got an element of screwball comedy, insofar as it's a reversal of typical gender roles, with Pussy Galore sometimes getting the better of Bond.
Isn't it customary to grant the condemned man his last request?
You've asked for this.
The jokes were still coming thick and fast right up until the end.
What kept you?
Yeah, so I think we're in a position now to say something about the movement across the first three films. So the first film, Dr. No, hardly has any comedy at all. Then From Russia with Love introduces a bit more comedy, but the big change in terms of the Connery Bonds comes in the form of Goldfinger. Then there ain't really so much to say about the next two films, because Thunderball and You Only Live Twice basically maintain the same sort of approach as Goldfinger. So in my opinion, I think there are actually 6 phases of comedy in the Bond franchise. Phase 1 is the movement that we can see across the first 3 films. But now it's time to move on to Phase 2. And that's the shifting comedy that we can see between On Her Majesty's Secret Service, Diamonds Are Forever, and Live and Let Die. Now a lot of people associate Roger Moore with bringing comedy into the James Bond franchise. And to some extent that's true, but I would argue that this introduction of comedy actually happened a lot earlier. We've already seen in Phase 1 how there was an escalation of comedy across the first 3 films. Now this is a bit out of step with how most people see the Bond franchise, but in my opinion the next big escalation of comedy comes with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. But before we get on to that, I think I need to say something about what was going on in British comedy at the time. So just so we know what we're all talking about, have a look at this scene from Carry On Doctor.
Oh, hi! Oh, what a lovely looking pair!
You took the words right out of my mouth.
And the 2 main features of this type of comedy are slapstick and sexual innuendo. But the funny thing is that it wasn't Roger Moore that introduced this sort of comedy into the James Bond franchise. Funnily enough, it was George Lazenby. Now it is true that we've seen some sexual innuendo in the James Bond franchise before this point, but On Her Majesty's Secret Service takes all this much further.
Is anything the matter, Surgery?
Just a slight stiffness coming on.
Good morning, Sir Hilary. Your stiffness of last night, it is all gone?
It's also got a fair amount of slapstick. Another staple of this sort of comedy is not only sexual innuendo, but sex comedy more broadly. And the objects of comedy here are things like bed swapping, promiscuity and adultery. And On Her Majesty's Secret Service has all these sort of jokes in spades. Insofar as it features bed swapping.
That old cow told you. Fancy meeting you, you Fräulein.
Oh, God, blimey.
And a comedy of promiscuity insofar as Bond's conquests happen in quick succession.
It's true!
Coming here like this was an inspiration. And so are you.
I must see you tonight.
9 o'clock? 10?
Hello, you old devil.
And the fact that Bond is in disguise for so long during this film also makes it feel more like a comedy, because he has to play the part of an uptight academic who speaks in a silly voice.
Genealogy is all about ancestors and families. I mean, it could easily be that any one of you here is related to a royal house.
Please, Sir Hilary, if you would sit there between Helen and Ruby.
I'm afraid I've never had much to do with young ladies.
So as I said before, a lot of people associate this comedic turn with Roger Moore, but a lot of these elements were introduced in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So in my opinion, the influence of On Her Majesty's Secret Service is the main reason why the tone of Diamonds Are Forever is so strange. And by strange, I mean inconsistent. So first of all, you got your sexual innuendo again.
Hi, I'm Plenty.
But of course you are.
Plenty O'Toole.
And then you got weird scenes like James Bond landing on a toilet. You got Blofeld dressed up as a woman.
Well, well, well. Look what the cat dragged in.
And then you got the comedy duo of Willard and White.
I must say, Miss Kay seems quite attractive. For a lady.
And then you got this sort of scene in a fairground.
What an eye! What a eye!
Wait a second, hold it. I saw the whole thing. The machine's fixed. Who's she, your mother? Blow up your pants.
Then you've got these absurdist or surrealist elements like having elephants playing slot machines. You've also got another surrealist element with James Bond talking to a rat.
One of us smells like a tart's handkerchief. I'm afraid it's me. Sorry about that, old boy.
And then you got the comical fight scene between James Bond with Bambi and Thumper.
First, we're gonna have a ball.
And then you got a lot of slapstick at the end.
You stupid idiot, you're gonna kill me!
But in addition to all this comedy, Diamonds Are Forever also has its fair share of brutal moments. For example, you got a dead old lady being dragged out of a canal. You got this bloke being killed by a scorpion.
Ha!
And you've got this Blofeld imposter being shot in the head with a grappling gun. And all of these scenes are a bit more gruesome than any scenes that we've seen before in a James Bond film. So in general, I'd describe the tone of Diamonds Are Forever as confused or mixed. And I think a lot of this confusion had to do with On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And then after this period of confusion, we go straight to Roger Moore.
Roger, which I think he may have inherited in part from after Diamonds Are Forever, where they were already getting into that area of too much hardware, that was more important, and his is a sort of parody of the character, as it were, in that situation, so that you will go for the laugh or the humour at whatever the cost.
So the more comedic and light-hearted tone of the Roger Moore era is established from the very start. For example, when we first see Roger Moore, we've got a sex comedy element of a girl hiding in a closet.
They seem to be missing one of their agents, Miss Caruso. You wouldn't happen to know where she is.
And then we got this element of slapstick between Bond and M.
Good God.
You see, by pulling out this button, sir, it turns the watch into a hyper-intensified magnetic field.
But Live and Let Die has got its fair share of very witty dialogue.
Roger, and that's why the humor may be increased in Live and Let Die, could play a quip very well.
Well, it's just a hat, darling, belonging to a small-headed man of limited means who lost a fight with a chicken.
It also includes a nod to the audience that this is a Bond film that ain't to be taken too seriously.
Hand it over. You have found yourself.
Roger Moore was also associated with introducing this comedy of understatement, where Bond's ability to maintain a cool head in dangerous circumstances is dialed up to 11.
Now, I promise you'll stay right there. I shan't be long.
And of course, Live and Let Die stands out for introducing the most comical character that we've seen so far in the James Bond franchise.
It's a Bond movie, so you know Bond is going to win. If the villain is black, you know he's going to lose because the villain is going to lose. So along the way, I thought maybe we can have some other people to make fun of.
Toby, I got me a regular Ben-Hur down here. That kind of dialogue you can't miss, you know. What are you? Some kind of doomsday machine, boy?
Now, phase 3 is all about comedic escalation, and this escalation occurs over the long period of Roger Moore's tenure as Bond. But in terms of comedy, the next two films are roughly comparable to Live and Let Die. So again, you got the same sort of sex comedy as you saw in the first Roger Moore film, with a girl hiding in a closet again. You've also again got the same sort of witty one-liners.
The one-liners that you remember in, or I remember in Bond. Tom came up with some really good ones.
I'm now aiming precisely at your groin. It says, speak or forever hold your peace.
You've also got some sexual innuendo.
Good morning. How's the water?
Why don't you come in and find out?
Sounds very tempting, Miss...
To me.
Really?
And we also see the return of J.W. Pepper. And he's possibly even more absurd in this film than he was in the last film.
Oh, he was so funny. He was so much larger than life.
Now, I know you.
Oh, no.
You're that secret agent. That English secret agent from England.
He also provides a fair amount of slapstick.
Oh, you is ugly.
But again, the main source of comedy here is that J.W. Pepper is so far out of his depth. So again, he plays the part of the comical buffoon.
I've been deputized, right?
Right.
But this film also includes a comical sound effect, which is something we'll see more of in the later Roger Moore films. Now, of course, Roger Moore himself knew that he was taking Bond in quite a different direction, and in this clip he explains the reason why.
So, Sean, physically, is a much tougher individual than I am. It was easier to accept him as a killer than me, and my sort of sense of humour, I suppose, sort of has to overcome that. I cannot say, I am going to kill you, and mean it. You know, I don't mean it at all. You know, I know damn well that we go to the bar and have a drink afterwards. And so I suppose that has sneaked into James Roger Moore Bond.
Now, with the third Roger Moore film, The Spy Who Loved Me, we get a different director. Lewis Gilbert takes over from Guy Hamilton. Now, there ain't too much of a change in terms of the type of comedy, because most of the jokes are either slapstick,
Mamma mia, che è successo? Oddio, tutto distrutto!
or sexual innuendo.
007, Triple X. Bond, what do you think you're doing?
Keeping the British end up, sir.
Although The Spy Who Loved Me does contain two jokes that are very non-PC. One about women drivers.
Women drivers.
Quiet.
And another about Egyptian builders.
Egyptian builders.
But with his next film, Moonraker, Lewis Gilbert really ramps up the comedy.
People go to laugh at Bond films, that it's fun, and it should carry on being fun. Ironic? I don't know that it was ironic. There was a certain amount of sending up in the picture, and I think we do that in this film. We just don't take it seriously. We just really want people to enjoy it and be happy when they come out of the cinema.
So this is another James Bond film with slapstick, but it's slapstick of a more extreme kind. And of course we got a generous helping of sexual innuendo again.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
And this film also features the comedy of understatement.
Hang on, James.
The thought had occurred to me.
But what really sets this film apart in terms of escalating comedy is the gondola sequence. which features the infamous pigeon double take. This film also features an absurdly comical, romantic subplot with Jaws and Dolly. But after this film we got a brand new director, in the form of John Glenn. And initially with his first film, For Your Eyes Only, there's a slight scaling back of the comedy. But here he explains his fondness for slapstick.
It's like a mix between James Bond and Keystone Cops. We love to thrill people. There's nothing better than after a thrill to get the laugh.
Nevertheless, this film did also contain its fair share of ridiculous moments. And then you got a silly scene at the end when Margaret Thatcher thinks she's talking to James Bond, but she's actually talking to a parrot.
Dennis and I look forward to meeting you. Meanwhile, if there is anything I can do for you...
Give us my kittens. Give us my kittens.
Oh, well, really, Mr. Bond.
Oh yeah, I almost forgot. The last three films, The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker and For Your Eyes Only, also feature a running gag, where this anonymous boozer is always in the background watching James Bond's shenanigans.
That was a ghastly in-joke of Lewis Gilbert and myself. The man is called Victor Turjansky.
He was one of the best local assistant directors.
I have done a few parts here and there, like helping out, at the last moment when an actor was not on time or something. And they asked me to do it, so I said, well, let's try. Can I use a bottle? So I take like a double take. I was looking first at the lotus, then at the bottle. He said, do anything you want to do, and let's see what happens. But he was happy.
Now with his second James Bond film, John Glenn takes the comedy really far. The thing is, you've not only got sexual innuendo in Octopussy, but typically when these jokes are made, Roger Moore really hams it up in front of the camera. And this is all very reminiscent of what was going on in British comedy at the time. So this sort of overreaction and pantomime performance actually reminds me of scenes like this from Are You Being Served?
On the wobbly slide, round the wobbly roundabout, up and down on the wobbly rocker.
You have to have two or they won't wobble.
But probably more than any other James Bond film, Octopussy also makes more use of comical sound effects. Octopussy also goes completely overboard in terms of sexual innuendo.
Having problems keeping it up, Q?
You've even got a scene where James Bond uses a camera to zoom in on some woman's boobs.
Perfect image, Q.
Really 007.
Now in terms of Roger Moore's final film, A View to a Kill, this don't exactly fit with the pattern of comedic escalation, because it's not quite as silly as Octopussy. Nevertheless, what comedy there is tends to be of the two types that we've identified before. And this of course is the comedy of slapstick, and sexual innuendo.
Oh, my dear, I take it you spend quite a lot of time in the saddle.
Yes, I love an early morning ride.
No, I'm an early riser myself.
Yeah, so that brings us to the end of Phase 3. And while it was a bit up and down, the general pattern under Roger Moore was towards comedic escalation. Now Phase 4 is very simple, and it won't take us very long, because Phase 4 is the 2 Timothy Dalton films. And in terms of comedy, the Dalton films are basically a reaction to the Roger Moore films. So in The Living Daylights we see a Bond who's very serious and businesslike, and the whole film has a much more serious tone. There is, however, one scene in The Living Daylights that feels like it's left over from the Roger Moore period. But this scene's a bit of an odd one out, because as I said before, for the most part this film is deadly serious. The only other comedy we get in this film tends to be of a more dry and understated type.
Get up.
Why didn't you learn the violin?
And then his second film, Licence to Kill, is probably the most consistently serious Bond film of all time. But despite the fact that they got next to no comedy, both of these films with Timothy Dalton were very exciting spy films. So again, like Dr. No, it just goes to show you that comedy isn't necessarily an essential element of a Bond film. So Phase 5 is the Pierce Brosnan era. And just as Dalton's seriousness was a reaction to the comedy of the Moore era, Pierce Brosnan's Bond is a reaction to the Dalton Bond. But this is by no means a return to the excesses of the Moore era. The Pierce Brosnan Bond is kind of a return to classic Bond. The fact that this was a less serious version of Bond was sort of made clear at the start.
Beg your pardon, forgot to knock.
In a way, we go back to a sort of pre-Phase 2 Bond. Although one exception to this rule is the fact that the Pierce Brosnan Bonds do lean quite heavily into sexual innuendo.
And for you?
The same.
How do you take it?
Straight up, with a twist.
This film also included comical sex scenes, with Xenia Onatopp crushing men between her thighs.
Xenia, I can't breathe.
And true to classic Bond, this film also contains clever and witty dialogue.
I enjoy a spirited ride as much as the next girl, but...
Who's that?
The next girl.
The comedy of understatement, and one-liners.
She always did enjoy a good squeeze.
With his second James Bond film, Tomorrow Never Dies, I think you could argue that the sexual innuendo was sort of ramped up a notch.
I doubt if she'll remember me.
Remind her. Then pump her for information.
You'll just have to decide how much pumping is needed, James.
And this film also included quite a lot of slapstick.
Filthy habit.
The Pierce Brosnan films also retain the same sort of relationship between Bond and Q. In this scene with the BMW, there's even an echo of You Only Live Twice.
Think we understand each other?
Grow up, 007.
Then in his third film, The World Is Not Enough, there was even an appearance by John Cleese as Q's assistant.
And you might be... This is 007.
If you're Q, does that make him R?
Ah, yes, the legendary 007 wit.
Then in Pierce Brosnan's final film, Die Another Day, John Cleese actually becomes Q, because he replaced Desmond Llewellyn after he died. Now, even though I really like John Cleese, I think he's absolutely terrible as Q. He tends to exaggerate the antagonism between Bond and Q to the point where he just comes across as a complete arsehole.
Just took a few seconds, Q.
Wish I could make you vanish.
Now, before we move on to the final phase, I think we need to understand the impact of Austin Powers.
Not a good time to lose one's head.
Indeed.
That's not the way to get ahead in life.
No.
It's a shame he wasn't more headstrong. He'll never be the head of a major corporation.
Okay, that'll do.
Okay.
By poking fun at the Bond franchise, Austin Powers created a bit of a problem. How do you do comedy in a James Bond film after Mike Myers had taken the piss out of it? So generally I think we can see the impact of Austin Powers insofar as the James Bond films with Daniel Craig became a bit more subtle and sophisticated in their form of comedy. Although that's not to say that we hadn't had smart comedy in the Bond franchise before. And again, From Russia with Love is a good example. Now, I do actually have quite a lot of complaints about the Daniel Craig Bond films, but I think the comedic elements of these films are actually very well handled. It's the right sort of comedy for a James Bond film, and it never really goes over the top. Now, Daniel Craig's first Bond film, Casino Royale, really stands out for having lots of clever and witty dialogue.
How was your lamb?
Skewered. On sympathizers.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Good evening, Miss Lind.
But just like the Roger Moore Bond films before, the Daniel Craig Bond really makes use of the comedy of understatement.
Stay calm and don't interrupt, because you'll be dead within 2 minutes unless you do exactly what I tell you.
I'm all ears. I'm sorry. That last hand nearly killed me.
The Daniel Craig Bond films also do something very different with sexual-based comedy, because the object of the humour tends to shift from women to men, and a lot of this comedy has a sort of homosexual undertone.
No! To the right! To the right! To the right! You are a funny man, Mr. Bond.
By the way, the idea for this torture scene comes directly from the Ian Fleming novel, but an interesting difference is that there's no comedy in the novel at all. So overall, I'd say the comedy of Casino Royale actually works really well. It sort of adds an extra dimension to the film, and it don't really take anything away from the serious scenes, or the general sense of drama and tension. The main thing is that it's exactly the right sort of comedy for a James Bond film. Then in the third Daniel Craig film, Skyfall, they did something very interesting with the relationship between Bond and Q. They effectively reversed the relationship, because Q is now younger than Bond. And as with Casino Royale, the dialogue here is very clever and witty.
A gun and a radio. Not exactly Christmas, is it?
Were you expecting an exploding pen? We don't really go in for that anymore.
And again, they do have some sexual comedy in this film, but again, the object of the comedy is very similar to Casino Royale.
Well, first time for everything. Yes. What makes you think this is my first time? Oh, Mr. Bond.
And again, we see some comedy of understatement.
007, are you all right?
Just changing carriages.
It's quite similar to the tie adjust we saw with Pierce Brosnan in GoldenEye. In Spectre, they do something quite interesting again with the character of Q. which involves a type of reversal. For one thing, it's Q rather than Bond who's cracking the jokes this time, while Bond is being very serious.
That old thing is taking quite a bit of time. Mind you, there wasn't much left to work on. Only a steering wheel. I believe I said bring it back in one piece, not bring back one piece.
But another interesting thing is that the relationship between Bond and Q becomes reminiscent of the relationship between Bond and Moneypenny back in Dr. No, insofar as it's a case of unrequited love, with a sort of subtle undertone of teasing.
That's it, lovely. Now, you may feel a small...
Christ!
Prick. Well, it's lovely to see you, 007. Right, lovely.
Now, in general, the Daniel Craig Bond films don't really go in for slapstick in the same way as the earlier James Bond films. But there is a very well done and funny piece of slapstick in the car chase in Spectre. And again, this film also includes the comedy of understatement.
We'll get on with it then. Nothing can be as painful as listening to you talk.
All right.
Spectre also includes one absurdist or surrealist element when James Bond talks to a mouse.
That's it, you. Who are you working for?
Which is actually a bit of a callback to Diamonds Are Forever. So I think we can close this video out with a question. Do Bond films even need to be funny? Well, my answer is not necessarily. After all, there are Bond films that are really great that aren't very funny at all. And Dr. No and Licence to Kill are two examples of this. So I don't think comedy is an essential ingredient. But if comedy is included, then I think it works best, in my opinion, when it's of a certain kind. And in summary, this would include things like witty and smart dialogue, an emphasis on a comedy of understatement, and character-based comedy involving supporting characters like Moneypenny and Q. I think some innuendo and slapstick is okay, but it needs to be limited and sort of reined in. Because in my opinion, Moonraker and Octopussy go much too far in this direction. And the main problem of having too much comedy is that it can distract from the sense of danger and suspense. So despite the fact that I have quite a lot of complaints about the Craig Bond films, I do think they handle the comedy very well. The comedy is quite limited and restrained, and it tends to be very appropriate for the James Bond films. In my opinion, it's the right sort of comedy.
I'm sorry. That last hand nearly killed me.